Last week we did our little intro. This might be another form of an intro, but it's just like I mentioned last week how the armor and the story of Joseph basically prepared us for this topic. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. But I want to always start with some Bible reading, which is and our focus scripture for this session, I guess, or this series, I guess we can call it, Deuteronomy 8. So I'm gonna go ahead and read that. This is the New King James Version. Remember the Lord your God, every commandment which I command you today, you must be careful to observe, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land of which the Lord swore to your fathers. And you shall remember that the Lord your God led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you and test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. So he humbled you, allowed you to hunger, and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man shall not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. Your garments did not wear out on you, nor did your feet swell these 40 years. You should know in your heart that as a man chastens his son, so the Lord your God chastens you. Therefore, you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways and and to fear him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs that flows out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vine and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper. When you have eaten and are full, then you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by keeping his commandments, his judgments, and his statutes, which I command you today, lest when you have eaten and are full and have built beautiful homes and dwell in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and your golds are multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, when your heart is lifted and you forget the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness in which were fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty land where there was no water, who brought water for you out of the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and that he might test you, to do you good in the end. Then you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gained me this wealth. And you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant which he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. Then it shall be, if you by any means forget the Lord your God and follow others, that you shall surely perish, as the nations which the Lord destroys before you. So you shall perish, because you would not be obedient to the voice of the Lord. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna read that every week too, and it's gonna throughout the series you're gonna actually start like poking stuff pieces apart from that, but that's our focus scripture here. So orienting ourselves for why the armor and why Joseph basically set us up for this. Because I mentioned this in the intro, but it was just like quick points. And now I kind of want to expand on that. And it's really good that we did the whole series on Joseph and on the armor, because now instead of actually going through each piece, we can just highlight what's going to be important for us for this next topic, right? So prepare for prosperity, why this matters. Before God tests us with blessing, he trains us with the process. So, I mentioned last week how I said God doesn't test us with God doesn't test us with plenty. He usually tests us with just enough. And then he sees how we act, right? He sees how we move when we're out of that crisis. So most people think that preparations is about surviving the hardship or God proving his power to us. Because for a lot of when we're like early in this walk, right, we need that kind of God to really show his power, because it proves to us that he is who he said he is, right? That's why we can ask him for things and then he'll do it. And why that's really impactful for us when we first get in here or first start this relationship with him because we don't know any better. Like we've been living our life on our own power, getting through, and we done got some of us got through just fine. A lot of people get into a relationship with God because they have like no other way out. They're going through something and then they just call on God and then he actually comes through. But in other people, that's not really the case. But whether or not that's how you came into the walk or if it's not, that first miracle, that first prayer answered is always going to be what really sets you up. You like that's how I like really preach that you got to have your own relationship with God. And the only way that really is how that really presents itself and for us to really believe it is for God to have answered that prayer, right? For God to bring us out of that crisis that we was going through. So it's great in the beginning, but that is just that's infancy faith, right? That's beginner level faith. And we are here so we can build up that faith. So scripture often shows preparation is about handling success without losing ourselves. Joseph and the armor answers two different, I mean, excuse me. Joseph and the armor of God answer two different but connected questions. Joseph, what kind of person can God trust you with influence, right? Because we know that Joseph ended up becoming second in command in Egypt. And then the armor, how does that person remain faithful once life stabilizes, right? Once you're out of that crisis. This section is going to basically bridge survival faith and sustainable faith. What do I mean by that? By survival faith, I say faith that emerges in moments of crisis, activated by immediate need and often fading once hardship passes. So that survival faith needs pressure to exist. That's that empathy faith that I was telling you about, right? Only going to God when you're going through something. Sustainable faith, which is really what we want to where we want to be at, is faith that's rooted in consistent, intentional relationship with God. So present and active, regardless of circumstances, not dependent on crisis or comfort, right? This is where we want to be at. We want to be believing in God even when we're not literally like life isn't life in, right? When life is looking good, are you still going to be faithful to God? And that's what this part is going to really show us how to do that. And we already went through like the in-depth studies on Joseph and the armor, but I'm going to pick apart pieces that's really going to frame this for us. So starting with Joseph, right? Character that survived his promotion. So Joseph's hardship was preparation and it was not punishment. Betrayal taught him humility. Well, think about the loss of status. Think about the loss of influence and authority, right? When he was with his brothers, he was his father's favorite. He could get away. I mean, he wasn't, getting away with anything because he wasn't really doing anything that wrong, but he could get away with anything, right? The way I like to read the Bible is really like putting ourselves in like his whoever the story is about, put ourselves in those shoes, right? And think about how they live their life because the Bible don't go day by day or how they live their life, right? So we have to think about this. And these people, these are just human beings. So let's think if you have a huge family, but you know for a fact that you are the favorite, right? I have my sister. Like God knows. Oh, I thought that was a hand being raised. God knows that she could get anything she wanted from my dad. And all the siblings do that too. So she could just get away with certain things that we couldn't get away with. So that just enabled like a different kind of motion or a different kind of movement in just day-to-day life. So you have to imagine that Joseph, while he's still living with his brothers and have this utmost favor, right? He's getting the colorful robes. He getting special treatment from his dad. That has to create some kind of influence or create some kind of authority that he feels. Not to mention, he's getting these dreams saying that his brother's gonna bow down to him, right? Saying that he's gonna be ruler and have this authority over people. So he just has no reason in the world to be humble, basically. So that betrayal taught him that humbleness, right? That slavery taught him submission. Going back to Potiphar house, right? Because in when he was with his brothers, he really didn't have to submit to anybody except for his father, right? And his father basically let him do whatever he wanted to do. But when he got into Potiphar house, he had to learn that submission, right? And it was slavery, but it was slavery with an asterisk because he was basically second in command in Potiphar house too. But that also was preparation for where he got to Egypt. And then finally, the prison taught him patience because we know that he was there for a lot of years. I can't remember the exact number of years, but he was there for a long time, and he should have been out sooner. But the baker that was supposed to tell the emperor about him forgot until the time was right, or until God brought it back to his remembrance, right? So that prison taught him patience. That's Genesis 41, 39 through 41. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and as wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater to you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over the land. Right. And this is Joseph, just literally coming straight out of prison and going straight into a place of power, right? Because he was being patient, because slavery taught him submission. So, and that betrayal taught him that humility, right? All these things that may have seemed like a punishment to somebody else was just preparation to get him to where he was. So God didn't promote Joseph because he survived hardship. He promoted him because hardship didn't distort his character, right? It didn't change who he was, right? He didn't start rebuking God because of all the things that God have allowed for him to happen. Instead, he doubled down and saying, whatever it is, like, even though I might be going through all this, it's for a reason. And it all works together for the good. And that wasn't even written in the Bible yet. So he just had to believe that. So Joseph wasn't proving himself to God. God already knew what he was capable of. He already knew his character. The process was forming him. Hardship set his baseline and humility so that when success arrived, he knew exactly where submission to God began and where it had to remain. Remembering what God did when he had nothing is what kept Joseph grounded when he had everything. And I've mentioned it so many times in so many different ways. When we going through crisis, we praying every day, 3 times a day. We might even go on an impromptu fast just to make sure that we being receptive to whatever God has to say, and we're doing everything that we have to do so God can get us out of that thing. But when we get out of that hardship, when we get to the other side of victory, that should just be a playbook for how we should be living daily, right? And then we're gonna get into that when we get more when we talk about the armor. But this is something that we need to be doing daily. That hardship, it really just sets the baseline for how our relationship with God needs to look. Because at the end of the day, we're gonna need God regardless whether we think we do or we don't, right? So, two, I'm sorry, I don't know if I said this, but Joseph's story is not about suffering, it was about stewardship, right? This is all being preparation for obedience and prosperity. Two, Joseph did not confuse power with permission. Excuse me. Joseph, when he got to that place of power, he didn't seek revenge, he didn't indulge in access, and he didn't abandon discipline, right? These are all things that I probably would like. I'm coming straight out of prison into second in command in the most richest place in Egypt, in the world at that time. I'm definitely about to take a little break. I'm definitely about to party a little bit, but Joseph didn't do that. Celeste?
Can you repeat that second point really quickly?
Um, Oh, Joseph didn't seek revenge. He didn't indulge in access, and he didn't abandon discipline. So, and then this is Genesis 41, 46 through 49. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. When in the seventh plentiful year, the ground brought forth abundantly. So he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt and laid up the food in the city. He laid up in every city the food of the fields which surrounded them. Joseph gathered very much grain as the sand of the sea until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable, right? And this is because he already knew what was happening. What did he do? What I wouldn't have done, right? I would have took a break. I would have partied a little bit. I just got out of jail for 18 years. I want a little break. But that's why God is still working on me. But Joseph here is the blueprint, right? So even though I wouldn't have did that, Joseph immediately began planning, saving, and serving, right? Because he know the years of famine are going to be here soon, right? So as soon as he gets to his place of power, he starts showing God and showing the people what good stewardship is, right? And he continues to do that until he died, basically. So yeah, so that's basically he didn't confuse the power with permission, because he could have, right, when the brothers came to him, he could have gave him a lot more of a hard time. He just gave him a couple tests. I don't know, I probably would have did more. But that's why I'm not Joseph, right? And that's why we all striving, right? We none of us are perfected works. But he didn't confuse because if he made that choice, right, when he was in that place of power, no one would have told him otherwise. Nobody would have told him he was wrong, right? Except for his conviction with God. That's the only thing that would have corrected him. But he continued to do what God wanted him to do, rather, regardless, right? So then Joseph remembered hardship without assuming immunity. Genesis 50 and 20. This is one of my favorite verses from this story. But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day to save many people. Joseph interprets his past through God's purpose, not his own resilience. And this is just so impactful to me because I literally just was watching Transformation Church on Sunday, and it was literally talking about the and how that can affect us moving forward in the future. What Joseph did here is something that was mentioned in on Transformation Church last week, right? He took his past and he repackaged it and then represented it, right? He was betrayed. Yes, he his brothers was going to kill him, but then decided to sell him into slavery anyway. So he had to feel that hurt, that shame. All of that stuff is real. But looking back on the lens that how God wants us to see it, he's able to reshape it and repackage it in a way that, yeah, this you did all of this, but all that did was create this the stage. All I did was set the stage for me to that I needed to learn to get to where I need to be now and to be effective in that role. I just had poor communication. So is everybody still with me? Hopefully nobody missed anything. But yeah, so when you're going through these hardships, that's why I want us to see things the way that God sees it. And I went through a whole spiel about that in Armor of God's series about us looking at situations, looking at the storm the way God see it, right? Because God don't see a storm; He see the beauty behind it, right? He see right above the clouds when it's all sunshine and rainbow. And I'm not saying we're going to be able to do that every time. I mean, we're human at the end of the day, but that should be the goal. That should be what we're striving for. I have a historical parallel here, but I really want to get straight into it. I mean, a historical parallel with George Washington. Yes, he got some bad stuff. We all know he had some slaves and everything, but in terms gained a lot, he gained power and loyalty, right? But he voluntarily would relinquish his authority by setting the terms for the president, right? They wanted him to be a king, but he knew that to ensure that the president serves the people, it couldn't be a forever term. It had to be an end to it, right? And you couldn't just like run indefinitely kind of situation. So what he understood is that leadership is stewardship. Authority demands restraint, right? All of us are leaders. I'm sure everyone that's going to listen to this, whether it's here on a Zoom or on a YouTube, wherever it is, you're leaders in some form or fashion. Because God isn't calling us just to all be followers, right? We're followers of Him first. But after that, we have our own missions, we have our own goals to do. So that's how Joseph prepared us, right? For success. Joseph's story is not about suffering, it's about stewardship and preparation. Joseph didn't confuse power with permission. And then he remembered hardship without assuming immunity. So key lesson there is that remembering that hardship keeps gratitude alive. Forgetting it breeds entitlement. Joseph never treated success as proof that he had arrived. He's the perfect work. He was always growing, always showing cases that he could get better. Think about when he was going through putting his brothers through all the tests, right? He had to have actual feeling. He had to have feel like he wanted to repay them the same way they did him, but he didn't, and he continued to grow. And then, going on, how did the armor kind of prep us for this, right? The armor preparation, excuse me, protection when life is quiet. This is going to be huge. The armor is not crisis gear, it's worn daily. Ephesians 6:13. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God that you may be able to withstand in the evil day and having done all to stand. Notice that Paul doesn't say put on the armor when attacked. Notice he doesn't say put on the armor when you're ready to fight back. This is something that we need to be doing daily. He says to put it on just so you can stand, right? Oh my God. Just so you can stand, you have to have that armor on, right? Without that armor, we are falling for everything. Without that armor, all the fiery darts are going to pierce us in our heart and our mind and our body, and we're not going to be prepared for it. And then we end up going to God, and now we in that crisis when if we had that armor on, we can be in peace a little longer, right? We could be in a healthy state a little bit longer. Not saying that just because you have the armor on, attacks aren't going to come. Obviously, the armor is to protect you from this kind of stuff. But watch this: for the armor to truly be effective, you have to make sure that you're wearing it before the battle even comes. So think about this. The letter, this is context that we talked about in the Armor of God series. This letter is written to a stable church, right? The church of Ephesus, they doing good. They following Christ, right? And when letters come from not Joseph, letters come from Paul, they're excited because they want to know that they're doing good. They usually hear that they're doing good. Like think about literally the first like 4 or 3 chapters in Ephesians is basically Paul saying how good they're doing, right? Paul saying that you guys are doing well. But he gets here so they don't get a big head, right? Just because they are succeeding does not mean that they've already arrived. So what am I saying? Armor only works when worn before the battle begins, meaning you must get used to it before war starts. A seasoned warrior would never go into a battle with untested armor. We must do the same so we can get comfortable in it, right? And what am I saying here? If you put it on a brand new set of armor and you don't know how heavy that is, you don't know how that's going to affect your movement, right? So you may not be able to move as effectively as you were without it. What am I saying here? We have to put on the armor daily is practice. So when we're actually under attack, we are able to move comfortably. Imagine that you in the middle of a home invasion and you pull out your gun, you don't know how to use it. You trying to read the instructions while they beating your door down. You trying to read the instructions on how to fire a gun while they literally about to in your face kind of situation. Obviously, you about to get got. So to prevent that, what do? You go to class, you go to gun classes before the time to use the gun arrives, right? You go to self-protection classes, right? Because imagine you you don't even have the gun, right? But you look at one of those videos talking about how, oh, this is me raising my hand. Okay, whoops. Yeah, you look at one of the videos, one of them self-defense videos, and you try to do what they did on the video. I'm telling you right now, it ain't gonna work out good for you. So we have to prep ourselves before battle ever comes, so that when the battle arrives, when crisis comes, we're actually comfortable in it, right? We actually can still think calmly when that kind of stuff comes. And I'm not saying that's going to be us 100% of the time, because yes, we are still human, but we have the strength of God with us, so we're able to be prepped for that kind of stuff. Two, prosperity without subtle warfare. What am I saying here? When life improves, attacks don't stop, they just shift. Don't stop, they keep going. Sorry. Praise, I'm sorry. Pride replaces temptation, comfort replaces conviction, and forgetfulness replaces rebellion, right? So when we going through all these kind of crises, you ain't about to get off course. You ain't getting tempted by any of that kind of stuff. But when we in that season of plenty, right, it's very easy for us to slack off. It's very easy for us to get comfortable. It's very easy for us to start justifying sin or justifying us falling off. So I want us to be aware of this. Not Paul, First Peter 5 and 8. Be sober, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. The enemy does not need chaos. Distraction works just as well. Yeah. I'm gonna say that again. The enemy does not need chaos. The enemy does not need a bunch of stuff happening around you. The enemy does not need a crisis to operate or to launch attacks in our lives, because distractions are just as deadly. They're maybe even more deadly, right? And I've mentioned this before. I've used this example multiple times. When you open that first door of distraction, right, it's easier to walk into that second door. It's easier to open that third door. And then once you get to the fourth door, you ain't even thinking about getting back on track because you're so deep in. And even once you get to that point where you're like, wow, I'm so off course. Now you have to walk back through all of those doors to get back on course, right? But thank God for being God because he can give those kind of shortcuts when we realize that. But before we even get there, right? We can identify that kind of stuff. Another example that I want to use, like when if anybody like is familiar with like editing videos or like the Adobe Suite or any kind of modeling software. This is something that I used to do like when I before I got smart enough to just create a new layer and then do all this kind of stuff. If it's something I wanted to see, I will start applying that to the main model or applying that to the main layer without making a new layer. And so when I get to that point, get finished with when I get finished drawing up or making the edits for what I wanted to see what it will look like or anything like that, and I wanted to stay the course. I mean, stay off of that course and stay on the. Those kind of traps happen at the height of comfort while we have the full armor on. The first one is a conscious decision. That first step into distraction. After that, it becomes less and less of a conscious decision, and then you wake up one day and you realize how far off course you are. So want us to be wary of that. Um, the belt deception because we know this about the truth. If we anchor that we're self-aware, right? Because a lot of things that I learned in a training at my job, self-awareness is so big, and it's a stat that they provided, which was shocking to me. It was either 90 or 95% of people in the workforce are not self-aware, right? So when the problem comes that is their fault, 9 times out of 10, they don't even recognize it, right? And I want us to be mature enough to realize that we need to be having those self audits are so important. We need to think at the end of the day, we need to think about everything that we've been through and then compare it to what God would have wanted us to go through or how God would have wanted us to respond is a better way to say that. The breastplate of righteousness guards against pride. I mean, that's self-explanatory. If we're anchored in God's righteousness, which is not anything that we can provide, it's not anything that we can do to be righteous. God gifts us that we are only righteous through God. We literally combat pride in that way, and we can always stay humble. The shoes of peace stabilizes faith in calm seasons. That shoes are so important because those shoes can walk on smooth land, or it can walk on uneven land, on rocky terrain, right? On muddy terrain. So that if we are able to be anchored, which is peace, right? That peace that God gives that surpasses all understanding, right? Because when we're going through those crises, right? But we still remain peaceful. The outside world is not going to understand that. The outside world is going to be questioning us like, you not see what's happening in your life? Do you not see that your car about to get repossessed? Do you not see that you might be facing homelessness if something don't change soon, right? But if we open up our eyes and see the way that God wants to see, we know that everything that works together for the good. And then the shield of faith blocks from subtle doubt, right? Helmet of salvation. I'm gonna speed up a little bit because we kind of running a long time. Helmet of salvation anchors identity beyond success, and the sword of truth keeps discipline sharp. Like all of like those last ones is kind of self-explanatory, but the helmet of faith anchors our identity beyond success. I really want to beat that point home, right? Because one of the most powerful attacks and most treacherous attacks of the enemy is are attacks that attack our mind, are attacks that make us think that we are not children of God, that we are not royalty, right? God, Jesus, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, right? And because we are adopted into this family, that automatically makes us royalty, and we have to move different when we're royalty. We can't do everything that peasants do, that the common folk do, because we are royalty. And if we have that mindset, we can make sure that we're approaching problems and success the way that God sees us. So in reality, the armor doesn't make you aggressive; it keeps you consistent, right? It doesn't automatically mean that it's time to attack. It just means that you're staying consistent. A good soldier maintains his armor daily, right? So when battle do come, they're prepped, they're ready, and they good to go. They ready to fight at a moment's notice kind of situation. And then historical person I have for here is literally Marcus Aurelius, which was the emperor at the height of the Roman like strength in history, right? And he's a really good example because he practiced discipline, humility, and restraint, right? He wrote meditations to guard his inner life. So even without like Christian theology, he understood that power without discipline destroys you. It destroys the self, right? If you just let power run rampant, if you let the success get to your head, you are bound to fail. And so, how do we put these kind of things together? Joseph shows us who to be when God elevates us, but the armor shows us how to remain that person once life becomes stable. Joseph had wisdom, authority, he had favor. The armor explains how wisdom, grounded in truth, how authority is exercised without pride, and how favor is stewarded without waste, right? Together they reveal the character that earns opportunity, but discipline sustains it. I'm gonna read that part again. Together they reveal that character earns opportunity, but discipline sustains it. If Joseph got to that point because of who he was, because of what he did when he was going through everything, and then he got to that place of power, and then just forgot all everything that God had taught him throughout that season of a hardship, Pharaoh would have fired that man. He would have been without a job and probably would have been back in prison, right? But because he had discipline, he was able to sustain that power and then be a blessing to other people, right? To save the lives of the entire nation. And it wasn't just Egypt, right? Because Egypt, the famine that happened in Egypt, um, was so severe that it affected the multitude of nations around it because a lot of nations really depended on Egypt for food anyway, like for trade. They needed Egypt to have grain and have rice so they could eat, and then they traded livestock for that kind of stuff. So when Egypt went through that famine, it affected not just Egypt but everybody around them, and that's another thing that I've preached on and like talked about is about how when God bless us, it's not just for us, it's to be a blessing to somebody else. So what am I saying? Joseph lived an armored life before Paul or Isaiah ever described it. So that's why I really like the story of Joseph because he really lived his life before the rest of the Bible was even written. This is all happening in Genesis. He didn't have no references to go on except for Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham. That was the only people who had a relationship with God before he came to the picture. But he used that little bit of knowledge to show us so many good things of how we should live, how we should operate in hardship, and how we can sustain ourselves in success. So, how are we going to bridge this to the rest of the series, right? In this point, I tried to answer why success is dangerous, why discipline must be replaced. Excuse me, why discipline must replace desperation, right? Because when we in crisis, desperation keeps us going and it keeps us committed. But once we out of that and desperation is faded, what's going to keep us growing? What's going to keep us connected to God? Is going to be that discipline, just knowing, and that discipline is connected to us wanting to have a good relationship with God, right? And it goes back to the romantic relationship where I mentioned earlier. Um, you're not going to do things that you know for a fact that your partner wouldn't want you to do, right? And even if that's like chewing with your mouth open, and this is a crazy example, but you know that your partner hate you chewing with your mouth open, and it might just be a bad habit. But for someone who really loves their partner, for somebody who really thinks about them, that's something they're going to work on, right? That's something that when they catch themselves doing it, they'll just stop immediately. And that conviction is the same kind of conviction that we should have with God, right? Because we still gonna make mistakes, right? We still are a work in progress. But once we are making that in the middle of that mistake, we should be able to catch ourselves like we probably shouldn't be doing that. God wouldn't be okay with that. And then eventually we get to a point where we don't even get to that mistake anymore, right? And then so discipline must replace desperation, and why growth must continue after blessing, right? Because God wants to keep blessing us. He don't want to just give us one blessing and then like leave it there, right? He wants us to be prosperous. He don't want us to be struggling. And for him to only give us one blessing, that one blessing only gonna last for so long. So we have to make sure that we're continuing to grow in God, right? And it's not just like a quid pro quo kind of relationship I want us to have. I want us to just do these things because we love God, and then the blessings just become a side product or a side effect, right? A byproduct is what I was thinking of. I mixed those two up. But the by obeying God's command, right? Success just happens as a byproduct. And so what's coming next? People who have failed this test, I'm going to give examples about that biblically and historical. People who have passed, we already talked about Joseph, but he was kind of like the perfect guy. So I want to have some examples for us on what the rocky, what like you catching yourself, what that looks like, and how we can get back on track, right? Because even though distraction, I've said many times about warning about distraction, we're still gonna fall into it. So once that happened, how do we get back? And then how obedience and prosperity proves love. Because I mentioned like just you following God or you believing in God when you're going through something isn't real love. That's like a sugar daddy kind of relationship. And we don't want to treat God as a sugar daddy. So what's the conclusion here? Joseph's story reminds us that success is not the finish line of faith. It is simply the next test of it. Hardship trains us to depend on God, but prosperity reveals whether we will continue to trust Him when dependence is no longer forced. The armor of God exists not because life is always hard, but because faith must remain intentional even when life becomes easy. Blessing does not eliminate spiritual danger, it only changes its form. And the greatest evidence of spiritual maturity is not surviving struggle, but remaining faithful once the struggle ends. And then our actionable tasks, we got four, but in total, it shouldn't even take you more than 10 minutes for this. So we got the one, reflect, where has God increased responsibility or influence in your life, right? Because the whole point of this is that we're living in prosperity now. We getting to that point where we're no longer in crisis. So think about what discipline kept me grounded during hardship that I'm tempted to relax on. This is a big one. I'm gonna read that again. What discipline kept me grounded during hardship that I'm tempted to relax on, or I'm tempted to not be as ferocious when I did it, right? Because one of my auntie favorite phrases, she loved hungry and thirsty people, because hungry and thirsty people are gonna make sure they get to that food. They're gonna make sure they get to that drink. But when you're no longer hungry and thirsty, that don't mean you don't need food no more or don't need drink. That just means you can go longer without it. But if we continue to keep that same mentality, we'll forever be fed. And then our scripture that we can reread is Genesis 50, specifically Genesis 50 and 20. If you read that one time, and I mean that's literally what I said in my favorite verses. They might admit that. Read it in a couple different versions if you need to. And then a prayer that I want us to just think about. Either add it to your existing prayer that you have with God daily, or if you ain't praying, it's a great time to start. God help me steward blessings the same way I survived struggle. And I'm gonna read that again because that blew my mind when I wrote this. God help me steward my blessings the same way that I survived the struggle. And yeah, that's all I got, y'all.